All right, going to quickly move through cells today. So we're going to look at animal cells and plant cells and bacteria and the plasma membrane. So there's other stuff you have to do, but I'll get going. So the important part of the cell is the nucleus. All right. So we all know that the nucleus contains DNA, right? And that DNA is then going to direct protein synthesis. So you may hear that DNA contains all the instructions for your cells and your body, and but really what it does is it directs the production of proteins. And we already talked about enzymes, and enzymes are those proteins that help reactions happen. So if I need something to happen in the cell, I make an enzyme. And then that enzyme will cause something to happen. So that's where the instruction part comes from. And we'll talk about DNA a whole lot more later. But you'll also notice that the DNA has these little holes in them, right? So those are pores. And those pores have molecules. So it might be small molecules like RNA molecules or specific little proteins or stuff like that that need to do work in there. And that's actually how the viruses get in there as well, because they're very small. But that kind of protects the nucleus, protects those instructions from larger organisms, right, and larger organelles. Within it is the nucleolus, right? So that little solid region here, well, it's the nucleolus. So this contains instructions for RNA. So DNA is the instructions. RNA are these little nucleic acids that carry out the instructions of DNA. Right? So that's the difference between the nucleus and nucleolus. And this DNA is all wiggly in here. It's called chromatin. I got the centrioles, right? So these are active. They're active at cell replication, which we're going to talk about later. It's mitosis. I got my ribosomes. That's the site. Site of protein synthesis. So you notice the ribosomes can be just floating in the, what we're going to call the cytosol, or they can be attached to the endoplasmic reticulum we'll talk about later. Right? So if their ribosomes are in the cytosol, they're making what we call unbound proteins, or proteins that just float. And if they're on top of the endoplasmic reticulum, they're making proteins directed or bound for organelles, right, or membranes. The cytoskeleton maintains shape. Right? And the cytoskeleton, there's one around the nucleus called the nuclear lamina. There's on the outside of the cell called the ECM, or the extracellular matrix, and there's little ones that go all the way through. Right, the plasma membrane here is this outer purple layer. So this controls what enters and leaves. I'm going to say controls entrance and exit, but I'm going to talk about it. Right, the lysosomes, these little green things here, right? They're calling those the lysosomes. And these break down material. What we call cell waste. So we can say that those lysosomes break down cell waste. And the mitochondria, right, so this is the mitochondria right here. You notice the mitochondria has all sorts of wavy membranes in there. So let me move this over here a little bit so I can. So this is An endosymbion so it's a trapped so endo means within, so that means in the symbion shares life. So it's something that lives within that shares our life, right? So it's an evolutionary leftover. So this makes ATP. We said that that's that organ, or that's that molecule, right, that we use for energy. But the reason why we say it's an endosymbion contains a contains its own DNA and self-replicates. So I have instructions in my nucleus for making all the other cell parts except for the mitochondria it makes itself. Right, and actually get the mitochondria over from the egg. Right, so all your mitochondria came from your mother, and then it just self-replicated. If it needs more of itself, it makes more. Right, if it doesn't, it doesn't. So the rough endoplasmic reticulum here. Right, so that's right. So it's a site of membrane protein production. So it has ribosomes attached. Right. I got my cytosol. That's the fluid in the cell. So the smooth endoplasmic reticulum as we work our way around the cell. Right. This is protein modification. And it's detoxification. Right. So this is fatty layer here. So if someone drinks a lot or does drugs a lot, this smooth endoplasmic reticulum will proliferate. It'll become larger. That's what, and it's a fatty material, right? We're going to talk about membranes or fatty material. So if someone gets a fatty liver, right, they're dying of cirrhosis because they had an alcohol problem. It's because of this, it's self-proliferated so much because there's so much detoxification that it just clogs the liver and kills the liver essentially. Not a good way to die. So that's, and the Golgi here. I forgot the Golgi. Golgi is really important. I can't forget the Golgi. So this is more protein modification. And packaging. Right? And they release these little, if you can see them here, these little small things coming off the Golgi. Right? Those are called vesicles. So let me bring it over here. So this releases. Via vesicles. All right. So the Golgi has two sides. This side over here is called the cis side. Cis meaning same. So your proteins are produced in the rough ER, they go to the smooth ER, they're released, they come to the cis end, and they leave from the trans end. And they'll either fuse with the plasma membrane and be released out of the cell, or they'll go somewhere else and fuse in the cell. All right? So the outside of the cell is a plasma membrane. right? So this whole purple area here, that's the plasma membrane. And that controls what comes in and out. Okay, so the plant cell is pretty similar. Right? It has almost all the similar stuff, except for it has a couple different things. Right? So you look at this thing right here, right? So this is storage. So that's central vacuolus, where it stores food and waste. Different organisms can have what they call a contractile vacuole. It gets bigger and smaller. But for plants, remember, well, you don't know, you can't remember yet, but you might. Plants do photosynthesis. They make their own food. They're called autotrophs, we'll talk about later. And so when they make their own food with these chloroplasts, they'll store it in the central vacuole. All right. So chloroplasts, that's going to be the site of photosynthesis. So that's the site of photosynthesis. And this is also an endosymbiont. So there are two endosymbionts, right? There are chloroplasts and there are mitochondria. And both make stuff, right? So this means his own DNA self-replicates. So sometime in evolutionary history, organisms captured these and they started making energy, and then we could go from single cell to multi-cell. And the other thing that's different about this is it has a cell wall, right? So that cell wall is a ridge structure. Remember, it's made of cellulose. Okay, so some differences between animals and plants, right? Cells are about the same size. Right, so let's talk a little bit about the plasma membrane. Right, the plasma membrane contains phospholipids, so it has a phospholipid bilayer. Right, so it's like a triglyceride, but it's a diglyceride, right? So this is hydrophilic. So this is attracted to water. So it's attracted to water. And this right here is hydrophobic. Which is repelled by water. Right? So we have this phospholipid bilayer, right? So we have one side there and one side there, right? And then all the inside here is hydrophobic. So we live in a water environment, so there's water outside the cell. The cytosol is water-based, it's inside the cell, right? So it controls what comes into the cell and out of the cell. So there's a couple of interesting things here. So you can have glycocarbohydrate chains, right? So this is a glycoprotein, and that glycoprotein, so that's used in cell identification. So when something's coming through and it's looking for a certain type of cell, it's looking for these glycoproteins. We can have proteins, right, like a protein channel. Right, I can have channels, so that'll be, you let substances in, So we can use them to let them in and out. We can use them. Oops, let me erase this. So I can also use it to send messages. From outside to inside, right? Cholesterol, right? Remember, cholesterol is a type of fat. Right, helps maintain fluidity, right? So if all of these were saturated fats, they would pack really tightly, and nothing would get in or out. So it makes it kind of fluid, because what we say is this right here. Get my pen working again. There we go. This is a C. It's a sea of phospholipids. So it's fluid. It's always moving. It's called the fluid mosaic model. Okay? So it's always moving. Right? But it's held together because the insides are repelled by water. Right? So it's kind of pushed together. Just a little bit difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Right? So we have this plasma membrane. So I have a plasma membrane that surrounds both. Right? The eukaryotic cell, right? So eukaryotic means true nucleus. So if we think about this, so eukaryotic here means with. Right? So we had our nucleus here surrounded by that nuclear lamina, right? It has those pores that allows things to get out. It holds the DNA, right? My prokaryote, this is a nucleoid region. And a nucleoid just means where the nucleus or where the DNA is likely to be found. So prokaryotic, right here, is no true nucleus. Okay, so that's the difference between eukaryotic and prokaryotic. So you'll see that they still have ribosomes. There's ribosomes all the way around, right? There's no organelle cell, right? So the word organelle means tiny organ. So it doesn't have tiny organs. It's about 1/10 the size of a eukaryotic cell. So there's not a lot of room, but it still's got to do all the stuff. It could have flagella, right? This is allows motion. Right, it works like a whip-like action in water, right? Bacteria do have a cell wall, right? And they could have a capsule, right, which is a slimy, right? If we look at it, it's kind of like a slimy. It's like a slimy covering, right? So that capsule, right, the slimy coating helps it stick to things. It could have pili, it could have fimbriae, a whole bunch of stuff we'll talk about later. But really, pro means this means early. A karyon, Karyon, means seed, right? So EU means this right here means true, right? So this has a true seed. and then the pro has an early seed, right? The seed is the nucleus, because that's where we direct everything. So hopefully that's a really short introduction, and good luck today.